Lena's boots scraped against the cold metallic floor as two towering Vracul guards dragged her through the dimly lit corridor of the research facility. The air smelled sterile, laced with the faint scent of ozone from the high-voltage energy fields crackling along the walls. She didn't resist, not because she was afraid, fear had been burned out of her long ago, but because she was patient. There was no need to waste energy fighting now. The guards, reptilian in appearance with thick, segmented armor plating covering their bodies, spoke in guttural clicks and hisses. She understood just enough to catch the gist of their conversation. They found her fragile. They found her weak. One of them even joked about placing bets on how long she would last once thrown into the cage. The Vracul were a highly intelligent species, but their arrogance blinded them to the simplest truths. Appearances could be deceiving. The reinforced doors slid open with a heavy hiss, revealing the main chamber. A vast domed room lined with thick observation windows. The air inside the cage was thick with the scent of blood and decay. A dozen creatures loomed in the shadows, their glowing eyes tracking the movement of the new arrival. Some were massive, their bodies coiled with muscle and sinew, fangs dripping with anticipation. Others were smaller but faster, their sleek forms exuding a predatory grace. Each was a masterpiece of natural selection, apex predators from the deadliest worlds in the galaxy. Lena was pushed forward, her body hitting the grated floor as the doors sealed shut behind her. She slowly picked herself up, shaking off the sting of the impact. The cage was massive, large enough to accommodate the monstrous beings prowling inside, but it felt infinitely smaller with death surrounding her from all sides. Above, through the observation window, a group of Vracul scientists watched in silence. One of them, taller than the rest and adorned with intricate metallic plating, pressed a clawed finger against the intercom. His voice crackled through the speakers, speaking in heavily accented Standard Galactic. Human. This is an experiment of endurance. Your survival time will be recorded. You are expected to perish. Do not resist. Struggle is futile. Lena smirked. You sure about that? A low murmur of amusement rippled through the scientists. She could hear them speaking in their own tongue, discussing how long she would last. Minutes, at best. No one thought she could fight back. No one considered that the true purpose of this experiment was not to see how long she could survive, but how much destruction she could cause. The first predator moved. It was a behemoth, 4 meters tall, covered in jagged, overlapping plates of natural armor. Its elongated jaw dripped with a thick, greenish fluid that hissed as it struck the metal floor. Its claws, each the length of a human forearm, curled in anticipation. The others backed away, their instincts telling them to wait, to let the biggest take the first kill. Lena didn't move. She didn't flinch, she simply watched. The behemoth lunged. Fast, faster than something that size had any right to be. A clawed hand, sharp enough to slice through reinforced steel, slashed toward her. Lena ducked at the last second, feeling the rush of air as it missed her by mere centimeters. She rolled to the side, her movements fluid, calculated. The monster turned with surprising agility, its mouth splitting open to reveal multiple rows of serrated teeth. Another attack. This time, a downward strike meant to crush her. She twisted out of the way, rolling between the creature's legs before springing to her feet behind it. The Vracul above murmured in surprise. The behemoth let out a guttural snarl and charged again, its massive frame shaking the ground beneath them. Lena didn't dodge. She ran straight toward it. The scientists gasped. Even the other creatures hesitated, confused by her actions. No prey ran toward its predator. It was madness, but madness had nothing to do with it. At the last second, Lena dropped low, sliding beneath the behemoth's sweeping claw. With a precise movement, she reached up, grabbing onto a gap in its thick armor plating. Using the creature's own momentum, she pulled herself up, swinging onto its back like a rider mounting a beast. The behemoth roared, thrashing violently, trying to dislodge her. but Lena had already found its weak point. Just below the base of its skull, where the plates overlapped, there was an exposed seam of flesh, a flaw in its evolutionary perfection. She drove her fingers into the opening. With the strength of someone who had trained for survival her entire life, she gripped the exposed flesh and twisted. A sickening crunch filled the air as the behemoth's spine snapped under her grip. The beast let out one final, shuddering gasp before collapsing. Silence. The other creatures stared. The Vrock scientists above stood frozen, their expressions unreadable. Even the guards outside the chamber exchanged nervous glances. Lena exhaled slowly, stepping off the now hapeless corpse. Her hands dripped with dark, viscous blood. She turned her gaze to the observation window above, locking eyes with the lead scientist. "Keep watching," she said, her voice calm, almost amused. "I'm just getting started." Above, the lead scientist hesitated before pressing the intercom again. This time his voice lacked the confidence it held before. "Release the others." The cage doors within the chamber hissed open. The real fight had begun. The heavy doors within the chamber hissed open, and the scent of fresh blood thickened in the air. A low growl reverberated through the massive cage as the remaining predators, momentarily frozen by what they had just witnessed, turned their eyes toward Lena. Their instincts screamed at them. Something was wrong. The human was not prey. She was something else entirely. She took a step forward, her boots sticky with the thick, dark blood of the slain behemoth. The metallic floor hummed beneath her feet, vibrating with the tension of creatures shifting in the shadows. One, a serpentine predator with glistening chitinous armor, coiled its long body along the grated floor, its forked tongue flickering out to taste the air. Another, a four-legged beast with muscle-packed limbs and a maw lined with jagged, uneven fangs, lowered itself into a stance, prepared to pounce. From above, the Vrockle scientists whispered among themselves in hushed, frantic tones. The lead researcher's hand hovered over the intercom, but hesitated. He had expected the human to die, to be torn apart in a display of dominance by the superior species locked within the chamber. Now, for the first time in his long career, he felt something unusual creeping into his mind. Uncertainty. Lena didn't wait for the next attack. She already knew hesitation meant death. The quadrupedal beast moved first, lunging forward with shocking speed, its body a blur of dark muscle. The force of its leap sent a gust of hot air against Lena's skin, and she only had a fraction of a second to react. She twisted to the side, barely avoiding the snap of its jaws as they clamped shut just inches from her arm. The monster landed and immediately coiled its body to strike again. She didn't give it the chance. Lena surged forward, closing the distance in an instant. She drove her fist into the beast's snout, feeling cartilage crunch beneath her knuckles. It let out a snarl and staggered back, dazed but not defeated. Its predatory eyes locked onto her with renewed fury, but something had changed. The confidence it had before was gone, replaced with something dangerously close to fear. Behind her, the serpent-like creature made its move. She heard the shift of metal as its scaled body slithered across the floor. It struck without warning, its massive jaws snapping toward her midsection, but Lena spun just in time. The serpent's fangs caught the edge of her shirt, tearing fabric but failing to pierce flesh. She didn't let it recover. Before the creature could retract, she moved. She gripped the thick muscle behind its head, twisting its body as it thrashed wildly. It was strong, inhumanly strong, but she had studied things like this before. The way it moved, the way its spine bent. There was always a weak point. Lena pivoted sharply and slammed the serpent's skull against the steel floor with all her strength. A sickening crack echoed through the chamber. The beast convulsed once, then fell still. The quadrupedal predator snarled, but didn't attack again. It circled her now, pacing, its tail flicking in irritation. It was learning. The others, still lurking in the shadows, were watching, studying. Good, let them. She took a step toward the pacing beast, her muscles tense, ready. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, hesitating for the first time. The primal instinct to kill waged war against the new understanding it had formed. This human was not like the others. And then something changed. The cage vibrated. A mechanical hiss filled the air as the farthest wall split apart, revealing a secondary containment field. The Vrock had released something else. Something bigger. The quadrupedal beast immediately backed away, slinking into the shadows as a deep, guttural growl shook the chamber. A silhouette emerged, stepping forward with slow, deliberate movements. It was unlike anything Lena had faced before, towering at least 12 feet tall. Its elongated body was covered in layers of hardened, blackened bone, natural armor that shimmered under the dim lighting. Its head, elongated like a hammerhead shark, sported rows of bioluminescent eyes that pulsed as it observed its surroundings. The beast's arms were unnaturally long, tipped with claws so sharp they left shallow grooves in the floor as it walked. Lena inhaled deeply. She knew what this was, a Meretrax. Not a mindless predator, but something far worse, a calculated killer, intelligent, fast, nearly indestructible. And it was watching her. From the observation deck, the Vrocul lead scientist finally spoke into the intercom. "This one is different," he said, his voice thick with anticipation. "Let us see if the human's luck has run out." Lena's lips curled into a smirk. Luck? No. She wasn't lucky. She was ready. The Meretrax moved first, its speed defying its size. In less than a second, it closed the distance, its massive claws arcing toward her in a brutal, calculated strike. She barely managed to throw herself backward, the air slicing past her as the razor-sharp talons missed her by inches. She rolled, landing on her feet, but the beast was already in motion again. It was fast, too fast. Lena dodged left, but the Meretrax anticipated it. Its clawed hand lashed out, catching her by the forearm and lifting her off the ground. She felt the bones in her wrists strain under the pressure, her muscles burning from the force. For the first time, pain flared through her body. The creature lifted her higher, its pulsing bioluminescent eyes narrowing as it studied her. It was trying to decide how to kill her. Lena gritted her teeth. Wrong move. With a sharp twist of her body, she swung her legs up, wrapping them around the Meretrax's elongated arm. Using all of her strength, she leveraged herself upward, twisting in a way no normal human should have been able to. Her free hand found the ridge along the creature's thick exoskeleton. She gripped it and wrenched herself upward, slipping out of its grasp and flipping onto its back in a single, fluid motion. The Meretrax let out a deep, rumbling growl of irritation. Lena wasn't giving it a chance to counter. She reached for the base of its skull, the one place she knew the armor was weakest, and drove her fingers between the thick, layered plating. The creature reacted violently, thrashing, but she held on. She twisted, pulling with all her might. A crack split the air. The Meretrax stumbled, its body jerking uncontrollably as its neural signals failed. A moment later it collapsed onto its knees, then hit the ground. Dead. Silence filled the chamber. Lena exhaled slowly, climbing off the massive corpse. Blood soaked her hands, her forearm throbbed from the earlier grip, but she was still standing. She looked up at the observation window. The lead scientist, who had once watched with smug amusement, now stared at her with something else entirely. Not curiosity, not arrogance. Fear. Lena rolled her shoulders, wiping the blood from her face. She had their attention now. Good. She wasn't done yet. The chamber was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the energy barriers lining the walls. The scent of blood had thickened, the metallic tang clinging to the cold air. Lena stood over the massive corpse of the Meretrax, her breath steady, controlled. Her forearm ached where the creature's claws had crushed against her bone, but she barely acknowledged the pain. She wasn't done. Beyond the reinforced observation glass, the Vrocul scientists had fallen into a hushed discussion, their rigid postures betraying their unease. The lead researcher, whose smug confidence had been evident earlier, now watched her with calculating eyes. He wasn't amused anymore. He was wary. Lena rolled her shoulders, stepping forward as the remaining creatures in the chamber lingered at the edges. They had seen her work. Even the most mindless predators had a degree of self-preservation. They weren't attacking. Not yet. Above her, a sudden burst of static crackled through the intercom. Then the lead scientist's voice, tight with measured intrigue. "You continue to defy expectations, human. But we are far from finished." A mechanical whir echoed through the chamber as panels shifted along the ceiling. Heavy blast doors hissed open, revealing cylindrical containment pods embedded into the walls. Each pod vibrated with a low, pulsing hum, their interiors hidden behind thick, reinforced glass. Lena's muscles tensed. New test subjects. The first pod unlocked with a loud hiss. A thick, mist-like vapor spilled from its seams as the reinforced glass slid open. Something stirred inside, its heavy limbs shifting against the restraints before stepping forward into the dim light. Lena exhaled slowly. The thing before her was unlike any of the creatures she had faced. It was humanoid in shape, standing close to 7 feet tall, but its body was covered in sleek, iridescent plating that shifted in color with each movement. It had no eyes, only a smooth, expressionless face that seemed to ripple as it turned its head toward her. Its fingers were long, claw-tipped, yet delicate, as if crafted for both precision and brutality. The Vrocul had not merely captured wild beasts, they had engineered them. The intercom crackled again. "Meet the Zerathus, bio-enhanced, adaptable. A perfect killer." The creature tilted its head slightly, as if studying her. Then it moved. Fast. Lena barely had time to react before it closed the distance, its movements fluid, precise. She dodged the first strike, feeling the sharp edge of its claws slice the air where her throat had been just seconds earlier. The Zerathis didn't pause. It twisted its body unnaturally, pivoting mid-main motor to strike again. Lena blocked, catching the attack with her forearm, but the force sent her skidding back. She felt the sharp sting of a fresh wound opening along her skin. It was analyzing her. She could see it in the way it moved, the way its attacks adjusted instantly to her counters. It wasn't just fighting, it was learning. Lena let out a slow breath. Fine, let it learn. She feigned a stagger, letting her stance loosen just enough to appear vulnerable. The Zerathis took the bait. It lunged forward, claws aimed for her exposed ribs. She shifted at the last moment. Her hands shot forward, grabbing hold of its extended limb. With a sharp twist, she wrenched its arm back at an unnatural angle. There was a sickening snap, followed by the first sound the creature had made, a low, guttural hiss. But it didn't falter. Its body shimmered, the broken limb twitching unnaturally before snapping itself back into place. The iridescent plating along its skin pulsed, shifting structure, as if realigning its entire framework. Regeneration. Lena clenched her jaw. She didn't have time for a prolonged fight. The Zerathis attacked again, but she was already moving. She ducked low, closing the distance before it could react. This time, she didn't go for its limbs. She aimed for its throat. Her fingers found the slight indentation between the shifting plates. Soft tissue just beneath the armor. She struck. The Zerathis convulsed, its body jerking violently as she drove her fist deeper, past the layers of reinforced cartilage. It let out a sharp, static-like shriek before collapsing. Lena didn't release her grip until she felt the last twitch of its dying body. She stepped back, her breath steady despite the rapid pulse of adrenaline in her veins. The corpse twitched once, its shimmering plates flickering, then finally went still. Above, the observation deck remained silent. Then another intercom hiss. Interesting. Lena's gaze snapped upward, locking onto the lead scientist. He wasn't speaking to her. Another voice, distorted and mechanical, filtered through the speakers. Someone else was watching. "She is more than we anticipated," the unknown voice murmured, almost in approval. The lead scientist shifted, his mandibles clicking together in uncertainty. "Shall we proceed with the final phase?" There was a pause, then the response. "Yes!" A deep, reverberating hum filled the chamber. The walls trembled. Lena's fingers curled into fists. She didn't know what was coming, but she was ready. A deep, reverberating hum pulsed through the chamber, rattling the metallic walls as the energy barriers flickered. The air itself seemed to tighten, growing heavy with the promise of something far worse than before. Lena shifted her stance, her muscles tensed, her instincts sharp. Above, the observation deck remained eerily silent. The lead scientist stood rigid, his clawed fingers hovering over the control panel. His hesitation was evident, but the voice from the intercom had already given the order. There was no turning back. The ground beneath Lena trembled. And then, the farthest wall of the chamber split apart with a slow, mechanical groan. Unlike the previous containment releases, this one was different, deliberate, controlled. A series of reinforced blast doors slid open, one by one, revealing a chamber bathed in unnatural darkness. Something was inside, something awake. A single guttural breath echoed through the dimly lit space. It was deep, resonant, as if the very air around it vibrated with its presence. Lena felt the fine hairs on her arms rise. The scent of ozone, mixed with something raw and primal, filled the chamber, triggering an instinct she hadn't felt before. Not fear, recognition. She had felt this once before, years ago, in the deep black of an abandoned research facility on a distant moon, a place where classified projects had been left to rot. She had seen the aftermath, bodies torn apart with surgical precision, security footage corrupted beyond repair. She had assumed the experiment had died with the station. She was wrong. The darkness shifted. A pair of luminous, inhuman eyes flickered to life, their glow cutting through the void like twin stars. Lena exhaled slowly. The Malkir. The name surfaced in her mind unbidden, like a buried memory clawing its way to the surface. A species wiped from existence centuries ago, at least according to official records, engineered for one purpose: adaptation, survival, elimination. The creature stepped forward, its massive frame unfolding from the shadows. It stood nearly 15 feet tall, its elongated body covered in an exoskeletal armor that pulsed with shifting bioluminescence. Unlike the Xerithes, which had been sleek and humanoid, the Malkir was a nightmare given form, a seamless fusion of biological terror and technological perfection. Its arms were long, unnaturally jointed, ending in talons that crackled with residual energy. Its face, if it could be called that, lacked a mouth. Only the glowing slits of its eyes and a series of pulsating ridges that ran down the length of its head. Lena had no idea how the Vrocule had captured it, but she knew one thing. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The Malkir moved. It didn't lunge. It didn't roar. It simply vanished. Lena barely had time to react before her instincts screamed at her. She threw herself to the side just as the creature reappeared, its claws slicing through the air where her throat had been moments ago. The shockwave from its movement sent her skidding across the grated floor, her palms scraping against the metal as she caught herself. It had teleported. No, not teleported. It had shifted. Lena didn't pause. She twisted to her feet, her eyes locked onto the Malkir as it turned toward her. The creature tilted its head, studying her, its glowing eyes pulsing in calculated intervals. It wasn't attacking blindly, it was assessing. Lena clenched her jaw. Fine, let it analyze. She reached down, pressing her fingers into the floor for stability. The Malkir flickered again, disappearing into the void of its own movement. This time, she was ready. She listened. The air shifted. She turned sharply, launching herself forward just as the creature materialized behind her. She felt the heat of its presence, the faint static hum of its energy-laced claws slicing through the air. She twisted mid-motion, her elbow snapping upward to strike at the exposed ridges of its throat. The impact connected. A sharp metallic reverberation echoed through the chamber as the male Kier staggered back, its exoskeleton absorbing most of the force, but Lena saw it, an involuntary flicker of its bioluminescence. A reaction. It could feel pain. Good. She pressed forward, closing the distance before it could vanish again. She feigned a high attack, forcing it to raise one of its arms in defense, then dropped low, sweeping her leg in a sharp arc. The male Kier reacted, its body shifting to compensate. But it was a fraction of a second too slow. Lena's heel connected with the back of its knee joint. The creature faltered. She moved instantly, launching upward, driving her fist into the side of its head. The impact sent a visible ripple through its form, the ridges along its skull flaring with energy, but before she could follow through, it flickered. Gone. She whirled around, scanning the chamber. Nothing. The air was still. Too still. She felt the shift before she saw it. The Melchior materialized directly in front of her, its luminous eyes flaring. Before she could react, its claws lashed forward, striking her square in the chest. Pain exploded through her body. She was airborne before she even realized it, her back slamming into the far wall of the chamber with bone-rattling force. The impact sent a violent shudder through her ribs, knocking the air from her lungs. She hit the floor hard, her vision momentarily blurring. The Malkier didn't press the attack. It was watching. Waiting. Lena gritted her teeth, forcing herself upright. Blood dripped from the corner of her mouth, but she ignored it. Her body ached, her ribs screaming in protest, but she shoved the pain aside. She had fought worse. The Malkier tilted its head again. Another assessment. Another calculation. Lena exhaled sharply. Then she smiled. The Malkier froze. Just for a second, she saw it. The hesitation. The smallest flicker in its bioluminescence. It had never fought something like her before. It was learning. But so was she. Lena rolled her shoulders, shaking off the lingering pain. She took a step forward, then another. The Malkier's eyes pulsed, its body shifting slightly. Anticipating. She grinned wider. She wasn't prey. She never had been. The creature flared with energy, its form shimmering as it prepared to shift again. Lena braced herself. The real fight was about to begin. Lena watched as the Malkier flared with energy, its form distorting, the very air around it vibrating with tension. The creature's bioluminescent eyes pulsed in rapid succession, signaling its intent. It was preparing for another shift, another instant attack meant to overwhelm her before she could counter. She didn't give it the chance. The moment its body flickered, she moved. Lena dove forward, closing the distance before it could fully disappear. Her fingers found the ridges along its chest, the overlapping plates of its exoskeleton shifting under her grip. The creature let out a deep, reverberating "oh." But she didn't hesitate. Using the momentum of her own charge, she twisted, leveraging all her strength to drive the Malkier into the cold, grated floor. The impact sent a sharp crack through the chamber. The Malkier lashed out with its claws, its elongated limbs striking with lightning speed, but Lena had anticipated the counter. She wrenched her body sideways, narrowly avoiding the energy-charged talons that sliced the air where her throat had been moments ago. It was strong, fast, unpredictable, but it was also arrogant. Lena could see it in the way it moved, the way it adjusted only after each attack, reacting rather than anticipating. The Malkier had never faced something like her before. It had adapted to countless species, absorbed combat knowledge from the deadliest creatures in the galaxy, but there was one thing it hadn't accounted for, a human who had learned to fight like a monster. She struck. Her knee slammed into the Malkier's abdomen, forcing it further into the floor. Before it could react, she drove her elbow into the exposed ridge between its collar plating, feeling the armor shift beneath the force. The creature let out a low, guttural vibration, a sound she recognized now. Not pain, frustration. It flickered again, attempting to shift away, but she didn't loosen her grip. Her fingers tightened around the plates of its exoskeleton, anchoring her to its body. This time, she went with it. The world around her distorted, shifting in a split second. It was a sensation unlike anything she had ever experienced, like being pulled through liquid space, her vision warping as reality bent around them. Then, just as suddenly, she slammed back into the ground. She released her grip, rolling away the moment she felt solid footing again. Her body ached from the strain, her muscles screaming in protest, but she forced herself upright. The Malkier stumbled, just for a fraction of a second. Lena didn't miss it. It was disoriented. It had never carried another being through its shift before. The calculation was off, the balance disrupted. She had found its weakness. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through her veins. She lunged, closing the distance before the Malkier could fully recover. This time, she didn't aim for a quick, decisive strike. She needed to end this. Her hands found the base of its skull, where the ridges of its exoskeleton met softer, flexible tissue. The creature let out a sharp pulse of energy, its claws slashing wildly, but she had already positioned herself behind it. She wrenched. The Malkier convulsed. Its luminous eyes flared, then flickered violently. The plates of its body shuddered, its talons scraping against the floor as its limbs spasmed. Lena didn't let go. She twisted harder, forcing the nerve clusters beneath its plating to snap. The creature let out one final, distorted vibration before its body collapsed beneath her grip. The glow in its eyes faded. Then, silence. Lena exhaled slowly, her breath heavy but controlled. She released the corpse, stepping back, her fingers still slick with the strange, dark fluid that seeped from its fractured plates. Above her, the observation deck remained still. She turned her gaze upward, meeting the wide, stunned eyes of the lead scientist. The others behind him had backed away from the reinforced glass, their once confident expressions now laced with something raw and unmistakable, fear. Lena rolled her shoulders, shaking off the tension. Then, she smiled. The intercom crackled to life, but this time the scientist's voice was different. There was no arrogance, no amusement, only uncertainty. "You," he hesitated, "you are unnatural." Lena tilted her head, wiping the blood from her hands against the torn fabric of her shirt. "No," she said simply, "I am human." A sharp alarm blared through the facility. Red emergency lights flooded the chamber as security systems activated. The observation glass shimmered with an energy field, sealing off the scientists from the chamber below. They weren't preparing to capture her. They were preparing to contain her. Lena smirked. Wrong move. She turned toward the far wall, where the blast doors had begun sealing shut. She had memorized the layout of the facility the moment she had been dragged inside. She knew the Va'ak operated with centralized control systems, fail-safes, designed to keep their experiments from escaping. But she wasn't an experiment. She was the variable they hadn't accounted for. She sprinted toward the exit, her body moving on pure instinct. A pair of automated turrets descended from the ceiling, their barrels humming with energy as they locked onto her position. She didn't slow. The first shot fired. She twisted, the blast searing past her shoulder, narrowly missing. The second turret activated, but she was already in motion, leaping onto the wall, and using the reinforced support beams to propel herself upward. Before the turrets could realign, she reached the control panel near the blast doors. Her fingers moved swiftly, overriding the sequence with a quick combination of stolen access codes she had memorized from the guards. The doors hissed open. Lena slipped through just as the security lockdown engaged. The chamber behind her was sealed. The scientists were trapped inside. She didn't look back. The facility corridors stretched before her, the echoes of distant alarms reverberating through the walls. She knew she had little time before reinforcements arrived. The Vracul would send everything they had to stop her. She welcomed the challenge. Lena exhaled, rolling her shoulders. The fight wasn't over yet, but she had already won, because now they weren't hunting her. She was hunting them, and there was nothing left to hold her back.